All right, let's go ahead and continue with our enhanced graphics. Now, in the last video, Zach didn't save at the very end. Just don't forget to save your ship, okay? Obviously, that's kind of important.
Yeah, that'll come in handy.
All right, well, now that we've got a ship graphic, Zach, let's go ahead and create our new lives display.
Yeah, okay. Well, that was a 16 by 48 image.
That's right.
So it's a single image with 3 little ships on it. Now, 48, or 16 goes into 48 3 times.
Very good.
So that works for me. That means the math is simple, and that makes me very happy. So what I'm going to do, I've already saved this. I did save it off camera. For shame. We're going to go ahead and file save as, though. And there's Ken and ship. Now, what is this, new lives indicator or something?
Just call it lives display.
Lives display in one big all caps thing. And we're going to resize it. So come up here to your image menu, and let's go to image size, and it's currently 32. Let's set it to 16, and click OK. And there we go. Let's take a look at it at 100%. So it is very tiny, as you can see here. If we press F, you can see it against a black background.
Okay.
As I move the...
yes, you just took the thruster power away.
I moved the thruster power. Actually, that'd be kind of cool in a way, because, you know, the ones waiting up in the corner don't have their thrusters on, but we won't do that. All right, let's press F a couple more times to go back to this type of image. The next thing I'm going to do is make my canvas 3 times as wide as it is right now. So let's go to Image, Canvas Size, and our width is currently 16. Let's go ahead and just anchor this over to the left-hand side, and we're going to take our width and set it to 48. Click OK, and there we go. So, you know, we're still on a black background, etc., and so forth. Now, I don't want to edit my thrusters, my details, or any of this other stuff, and really can't see much of it anymore anyways. So I'm going to select the thrusters layer, hold down Shift and select the wings layer, and then hit Control E, and basically just condense all that down into a single layer, just to make my life a little easier. Now, let's go, just to make sure we keep everything nice and straight and clean, let's go over to our view. We'll do a new guide, and we'll do, let's see, a vertical guide, and we'll do this at 33 point, and a whole bunch of 3s, %, bink. And of course we had our original guide there. If that gets in your way, just drag it somewhere off screen. Or you can also hit Control R to make your rulers visible. And then if you drag it back on top of the ruler, it's gone forever. So just a cool way to get rid of that. All right, now let's add another one of these. So let's go back to View, New Guide, and this one will be at 66.6666, a whole bunch of 6s, and click OK. And that went completely not where I wanted it to go. And I don't know why, but that's all right.
Do you want to give it a %?
I could. I could also put it at 32 pixels, and that'll work fine. Just because I happen to have my rulers handy. Okay. So it's just another way to do it. I guess that way it shows a couple of different techniques, and nobody can ever prove that I actually messed up. So that's cool. So let's take our thrusters guy. Now, this thrusters layer we could probably rename to ship. And here's a catch. If I just grab this guy right now and hold down Alt and Shift and drag him over, the wings look like they're kind of touching. Mm-hmm. If that's a problem, if like your art director comes by and says, can we make it to where there's a little gap in between them, grab your ship layer, that of course I did rename, and let's hit Control T, and this is going to scale this in now. And what we're going to do is hold down Alt. Now notice as I grab this corner and move it, we're just scaling this in all sorts of different directions. But if I hold down Alt, we're scaling it in toward the center. If I also hit Shift, we're scaling it in uniformly. And all you want to do is create a very, very slight pixel gap. So if we push it in just a little bit and press Enter, there we go. So now we'll have a little bit of room in between all of our ships. Alternatively, you could maybe offset them all by 1 pixel, but we're trying to stay within very tight constraints here. So let's hold down Alt and Shift, and we'll drag this guy over, and just hold down Alt and Shift again, and drag this guy over, and there we go. If we hit Control H, we now have our little lives indicator. You can press F to see it against a black background and set your percentage in your navigator back over to 100. And there you go. 3 little ships all in a nice little row. So let's Control S to save that as our Photoshop file. Let's also Control Shift S to do Save As. And we'll pop out of the Originals folder. Let's go down to PNGs. And we don't have anything for this. So what was this? Lives display?
Yeah.
I think that's right. Lives display. There we go. So now that one's done. Let's press F, and we can close this out, and it's gone.
Okay.
So now we're ready to do the enemy, finally. So let's do File, New, and this will be another 32 by 32 document. and let's press F to make it all nice and big. We'll zoom as far in on the navigator as we can, and once again I'm going to hold down Control and hit Delete to fill us in with a black background. Now, what I had in mind for this was kind of like a space mine kind of thing.
Okay.
All right, which is more a space mine. So what does that mean? Because, in some TV shows, that's a little glowing ball, too. So I'm thinking something that would be kind of like an underwater mine.
Okay.
So it's got a bunch of little buttons all over it and everything, and we can deal with colors and everything as we go along. But the key here is that is essentially just a sphere. So let's start off by adding in some guides. Now this time, instead of going numerically, I do have my rulers up here. Now your rulers may not be set to pixels. They could be set to percentage. They could be set to inches or centimeters. If you right-click on them, you can change that. So notice mine are set to pixels, and that's all nice and good. The cool thing about having the rulers handy is that I can create new guides just by clicking and dragging out from any ruler. And if I drag one out and line it up with number 16, that's 50% in the vertical direction. And then I can't really see 50% here unless I move my toolbar over to the other side. And there we go. So now I have my guides in, and I didn't even have to open up a dialog. Okay, so now that we have that in, let's create a new layer. And we'll call this mine, let me capitalize just because I'm picky, mine body, which might as well just say sphere, because all we're going to do is make a little sphere. Let's grab the elliptical marquee tool. Now that's hidden underneath the standard square marquee tool. You have to bring your mouse over here, hold down the left mouse button, and there it is. Now if you put your cursor right on the center of those guides, you'll notice they kind of change color just a little bit. And we're going to drag outward, and you'll notice we only get a circle that fills one quadrant. Don't let go of your mouse button yet. We're going to hold down Alt, and we're going to hold down Shift. And so now we're dragging out from the center. You don't want to go all the way out to the edge. You want to leave a really nice gap around the outside. So something, maybe, I'm going to do a little bit of back and forth, maybe something about like so. So there we go. And let's fill this in with a color. I'm going to hit D and then X to give myself white as my foreground color. And we're on the mine body layer, so we'll hold down Alt and press Delete, and we'll fill that in with white. Now, white, of course, is not the final color we're going for. We're going to adjust this with some layer styles, just like we did before. So let's go ahead and hit Control-D and make all that disappear. I'm going to hit Control-H to make my guides also vanish for a moment. And let's double-click on the right-hand side of our layer and bring up our Layer Styles window. Okay, so if we want this to look spherical, we need... well, I'm just going to use a gradient overlay. There's a lot of different ways you could do it, though. We'll just grab a gradient overlay, which that looks nice and spherical. I think we're done now. Let's set our style for our gradient over to radial. Now, this is exactly the opposite of what we want. This is all nice and bright on the outside and dark in the middle. So just check the reverse checkbox, and there you go. Now, the problem here is if we're doing this on a black background, obviously this won't work because now we can no longer see the edges of our sphere. So we need to go into our gradient and take that black color. So click on your little black flag down here on the bottom. Don't mess with these upper flags. These have to do with transparency, and you're not going to be adjusting that at all. So, or actually, technically they call it opacity. But you know how it's that whole 3D animation thing. Let's go ahead and just select our flag on the lower left, check the color box, and we'll push this up to a dark gray, just enough where we can get some sort of differentiation between the gradient and the actual background. So once we have that, that's all well and good. If you want to get a little fancy, and it's amazing, not so many people know you can do this, we can take our gradient and drag it up here to the upper left corner. And that gives us just a little bit of, kind of an offset of the light. Maybe you can move it up if you wanted to. I like the idea of kind of pushing it off to one side. It gives it more of a 3D look. So that takes care of that. Now, if you want to add a color to it, you can come over here to Color Overlay. Now, unfortunately, that's just going to make your object whatever color you have selected until you change your blend mode. So come over here and grab your blend mode, and we'll set this to Overlay. And there you go. And now you have, your specular highlight, you have your shadows. And I think that shade of red is just a little too bright. I do like the idea of a red sphere, though.
Maybe a little deeper.
Yeah, something felt like so. I think maybe our specular highlight might be a little bit too bright, so I might jump back down and clear that out in a minute. You want to go really far?
Not really far, but not where it's bright.
You don't like that?
No, not particularly. So down there somewhere.
Let's call it here for now until I go clean up that specular highlight. So we'll go back to our gradient overlay. We'll step back down inside of our gradient once again. And this time we're going to grab our white flag over on the lower right-hand side. take your color swatch and pull this down from white and down to something, well, a little dimmer, a really pale gray, for instance. So let's say something like that. It's still catching a little bit of a specular highlight. The reason I'm pulling it away from so bright of a white is that I'm thinking the little, I guess you can almost call them buttons. They're going to be all around this thing. They're probably going to be kind of whitish in and of themselves, so I don't want the viewer to get confused. So we have our mine body in place. Again, as you saw right there, it's very easy to edit this if you want to make any changes to the color or how the shininess is being affected and whatnot. So that takes care of that. Let's start working on some of these buttons. What I'm going to do is go back to our line tool, which you might remember from the last video, and we'll hold down the left mouse button on that. I'm going to jump down to the rounded rectangle tool. Now, this is going to create a rounded rectangle based on a radius. This radius controls how much rounding takes place at the edges. Remember that you have a very, very small document, so you don't want all that many pixels to be used to round these off. I've got mine set to 3. You can try that yourself or maybe adjust it to 2 or 1. I also still have anti-aliasing turned off, which is going to work out very well in our case. I need to do this on a new layer, though. So let's drop in a new layer, and we'll call this outer, if I can type outer, I can't type at all today. Outer buttons, there we go. I can use a mouse, but not a keyboard. Now I'm going to put this layer underneath our mine body, and you'll see why here in just a second. Let's go ahead and just draw out our very first rounded rectangle, and I'll hit Control-H to bring our guides back. Because what I want to do is kind of have an even amount on each side of the guide. If you're off by a pixel, don't beat yourself up too much, but that's kind of what I'm going for. Just kind of like a little rounded button that sits more or less right on top, like so. It's bright white, don't worry, we're going to be tweaking that a little bit later. Alright, let's center this up real quick and have a quick look. Now, I need one of these here, I want one on the bottom, and then basically at the 4, cardinal directions is how I want to do this. So let's start off by, with our outer buttons layer selected, we'll hit Control-A, so we have the whole layer selected. I'm then going to hit Control-T, and check this out. I can now rotate this thing around, and now that's my screen flying away. Let's bring it back a little bit. So I can rotate this all the way around like so, which is pretty fancy. And if you get close to the edge of the screen, you'll fly away, so watch out for that. It's entertaining, but it's not very useful. So let's hit Escape to undo that. What I'm going to do is take my outer buttons layer, drag it down on top of the new layer button, and that's going to duplicate the layer. Now that it's duplicated, notice I still have this big marquee selection that covers the whole layer, and I have the new duplicate selected. Let's hit Control-T again for transform, and I'm really carefully, hopefully staying away from the edge of the screen, going to rotate that around 90 degrees. If you want an exact 90, you can hold down the Shift key, and that'll help you a little bit. And there we go. So now we have 2 of these buttons done. Hit Control-D to deselect. As soon as you have focus back on your view. Oh, I'm sorry, we're not done transforming yet. It still thinks we're trying to transform. Press your Enter key when you are finished transforming, and then hit Control-D, and then you will deselect. Now, we have 2 different copies of our outer buttons layer, and we don't necessarily want to have to copy that again twice. So what I'm going to do is select the upper one and hit Control-E, and that's going to collapse that down onto the next one. So now with the original outer layer buttons, which now has both of these buttons on it, let me Control-Z that. There, Control-E. Let's grab our Move tool. I just want to show you that these are now on the same layer. That's all I'm trying to demonstrate. All right, now let's hit Control-A again, Control-T again, and this is not going to do what I want it to do, so I have to hit Escape.
Yeah, we need one more copy.
We need one more copy of the layer, as I get mildly confused on video. Let's hit Control-T, and we're just going to hold down Shift and rotate this around about 180 degrees. There we go. Press Enter when you're done transforming, hit Control-D to deselect, and we now have 4 of these little buttons all hanging around, and that's really cool. Now let's hit Control-E, and we just squash that down. So now all 4 of our outer buttons are all on the same layer, which is very fancy. Now, if we want to have it to where you can see like 4 more buttons, not protruding out quite so far around the perimeter as well, we can do that. Let's go ahead and just make another duplicate of our outer buttons layer. And we'll hit Control-T again, and this time I'm not going to hold down Shift. I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily rotate. Now, a quick thing. Now, you might be watching along with this video, and something just occurred to me, and it scares me when something like this comes to mind, and I realize I haven't covered it yet. You'll notice that when I hit Control-T to rotate, well, I don't know what I just did there, but let's hit Control-T again. To rotate, I actually have to have my mouse outside the realm of this box. If you're dragging on those corners, you're then scaling. Because when you hit Control-T, this is kind of like a general transform tool. This thing does a little bit of everything. It'll do moving, it'll do rotating, it'll do scaling, it'll do skewing, it'll do distortion. The list just goes on and on and on. So let's hit Escape. Let's hit Control-T one more time, and notice that my mouse is outside that actual corner, and we just drag that around. You can hit Shift if you want to and get a nice perfect 45-degree angle. And we'll press Enter. Then we'll immediately press Control-T again, and you'll notice our box just got a little bit smaller. We're going to hold down Alt and Shift and scale these guys inward to where they just kind of barely peek out around the edges, and press Enter. And there you go. So now we can zoom out and have a quick look at this. All the way to 100%. Let's hit Control-H to hide our guides, and then maybe hit F to see it on a black background. And you can see where we are so far. Okay, I'm going to hit Control-E one more time. So now all of our outer buttons really are on just one layer. Let's also zoom back in to where we can see our work so far. And let's hit F a couple of times to go back to gray background full screen mode. Now I also want some more buttons here kind of out in front of us. What I'm going to do to create those is come over here to my elliptical marquee select tool. It's still visible up in the corner. If you don't see it for some reason, just hold down the left mouse button and choose it from the menu. Let's also get a new layer in here. We'll call this Inner Buttons. And put a space in there just so that we're nice and, I don't know. And that's singular and not plural, but that's okay. I'm not going to let that one affect my OCD.
Okay.
Let's drag out a little elliptical selection. Doesn't have to be very big, and you don't have to be very precise about it because we're going to be moving it around anyways. Just get something maybe about like so, and then once you have it, hold down Alt and hit Delete, and that should be filling it with white, and it did fill it with white. Do you know why we don't see it?
Because we just happen to be behind the body.
We're on the our layers are out of order.
That's right.
Which is fine. We can just take our inner button layer, drag it on top of the mind body, and suddenly everything's visible. So let's hit Control-D to deselect. I'm going to tap V to bring up my move tool, and we're going to put this over here in this corner. But I'd like it to kind of follow the contour of our shape, so we'll hit Control-T with it, and again, put your cursor outside that corner and just kind of arbitrarily rotate it until it sits at an interesting angle. It's about 45 degrees in this case. And you can also put your mouse just inside to where it's not on any one of the corners and not on the little tiny pivot in the center, and you can move it around a little as well. If it looks a little funny, don't worry. Wait until you press Enter and see what it looks like, because after you press Enter, it's going to try to smooth it out a little bit. So that takes care of that. I wouldn't mind 3 more of these, just like we did with the buttons earlier. So what we'll do is copy off this layer, and we'll hit Control-A, Control-T, and we'll really carefully move our cursor just outside of one of the corners, hold down Shift, and rotate this guy around 90 degrees. Press Enter, and then hit Control-D. Now let's collapse those two together by pressing Control-E, so now the inner buttons are still just on one layer. Let's again hit Control-A, Control-T, holding down Shift. We'll now rotate this. Oh, you know what I did? I did it again.
Yep, that's all right.
That's all right. I'll just press Enter, Control-D, and I'll just rotate it again. So we'll make a new copy. And now we'll Control-A, Control-T, hold down Shift, and we'll rotate that all the way around. Okay. Now, in this case, I'm really glad this kind of happened. It can look like these are off by a little bit. You know, like the ones up here on top look like they're maybe a little bit to the right, it seems, or at least it looks that way to me. Before you merge them, you can, of course, use your Move tool and maybe just your arrow keys and nudge them over a little bit. If you have any problems, like maybe this, I don't know, actually everything's looking okay for me. Maybe this guy could be moved up. You can make sure you're on the proper layer. In fact, it might just help to go ahead and merge them all at this point. So hit Control-E so they're all on one layer. While you're on that layer, though, go back to your standard rectangular marquee tool. Grab whichever one is causing the problem. tap the V key to get your move tool, and then you can use your arrow keys to move it around. So you can just make little nudges and adjustments however you see fit. You also may need to go in with your eraser and erase out stray pixels, because sometimes when you transform, those extra pixels that appear to try to smooth things out can be problematic. What I'm going to do is just grab my marquee selection tool again. Let's grab this button, and I think if I just tap that up one more, then in general I'll be okay. So that takes care of that. There's only one more button I need to make, and I'm going to put it right in the center. So let's grab our elliptical marquee tool again. Let's hit Control-H to bring up our guides one more time. And holding down Alt and Shift, we'll just drag a little circle out like so. And we'll fill that in with white, so just Alt, Delete, and Control-D, and there we go. Let's also hit Control-H. Now, that's pretty bright, so we can kind of clean things up a little bit. Let's start with the inner buttons. I'm going to add a layer style to them. You can begin, of course, if you want to, with a color overlay, maybe to a very pale gray. And, of course, you can always adjust that later. And then what I like to do is add in a very subtle bevel and emboss, and it's just going to kind of give the illusion that there's a little bit of depth here. Just don't go too far with it. We might take the size of it down just a little to kind of tighten it up. Maybe take our shadow opacity and pull it back just a little bit. That's kind of up to you. You can sit there and sort of play with it. Another one that'll help, especially in this particular case, is if you add a drop shadow. Now, those are really, really tight drop shadows, so I'm going to take my size and pull those way in. Oh, I'm still on bevel and emboss. Don't do that. Leave that alone. Come up here to drop shadow. And we'll take our size and pull that in. So that looks really ridiculous, but if we now take our distance and we pull that in as well, in fact, you can also just take your mouse and you can put those shadows wherever you want. But notice something else when I do this. Do you see what's happening? Mm-hmm. The bevel and emboss is moving too. And the reason for that is that we're still using that global light. So if you want to move them independently of one another, take your shadows and switch off use global light, and then you can move them around wherever you want them to be, which can be really helpful sometimes. So we could pull our size down to 0, so it's a very, very small shadow. And I'm getting kind of picky. Let's say right about there works, but we're going to take our overall opacity and blend it back just a little bit. So it's just enough to give you a hint of depth. And we can, maybe a little deeper. And there you go. So now that takes care of those. Let's take a look at the outer buttons. So we'll add a layer style to those as well. We'll do a color overlay. Again, sort of a pale gray. Yeah, a little darker than that. Again, a bevel and emboss. And I'll switch these off of the global light just so that I can play around with them as I see fit. We could darken up that shadow just a tad. And in general, that's probably going to work out just fine. So we can go ahead and click there. The last thing, and this is entirely up to you. It depends on how your mind looks right now and whether or not you feel the need to do this. You can add a new layer and call this Custom Highlights as I, again, work with the spelling and typing bit. Let's grab our brush tool. We'll make this very small, and notice that my color is still white, and you can just add in little specular highlight dots wherever you think you might need them, because sometimes it just doesn't give you exactly what you think you should have. So feel free to use this technique to go in and maybe edit things around a little bit. But I think that's going to take care of it. Let's jump back all the way to 100% and hit F one more time, and there we go. So we've got our little mine that's ready to drop on our ship and blow it to pieces.
All right, so of course make sure you save this out, and that's going to wrap up this video.